Hi, and thank you for joining me this Monday afternoon. Today we're going to talk about indoor air quality for residential systems. My name is Greg Jutras, and I am with HVAC Solutions. Basically what that means is that I'm with TEC, Excelsior, and Harry Alter Group. The way I work is real informal, so if you have a question, go ahead and type it in, and I will stop and try to answer it. If I get too many or miss it, I'll get your questions answered after the webinar. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Kind of the agenda for today in terms of indoor air quality is talk about why people need it, the opportunity for sales, which ultimately leads to profit. So I'm going to try to keep this generic in terms of equipment so it can be applied to many different types of equipment that's out there. So when we look at indoor air quality as a whole, most of the problems can be put into three different buckets. First one is particulate, second one is microbials, and the third one is gases. Really, I'm going to say this is probably the most important slide we'll talk about. If you can figure out which problem you're dealing with, you'll know which way to find a solution for it. And I try to remember this by PMG, particulate, microbials, or gases. Generally the three buckets you can put indoor air quality into. So what is a particulate? If you ask me, it's the dust, the dander, the pollen, those kinds of things. These are the things that generally make people sneeze. So what is a microbial? This is the bacteria, the viruses, could be mold. These are the things that generally make people sick. So if particulates are going to make people sick, or I'm sorry, particulates going to make people sneeze, microbials will make somebody sick. Think of getting the flu. A lot of times that's from a microbial. The third bucket we talked about was the gases. And gases are one of those things I generally associate with smells. So it could be exhaust, could be fumes, could be smog. There's a lot of different things it could be. And like I said, I generally equate it to a smell. But in the HVAC world, we know that there are some gases that you can't smell, and they are very dangerous as well. You know, carbon monoxide comes to mind. It's a gas, and you'll never smell it, but it can harm you. Inside of the gases family are what we call VOCs. And that little symbol in the middle is the symbol for formaldehyde. Nobody ever knows what that is. Formaldehyde is everywhere. We're going to talk about it a little bit. But VOCs are kind of the poster child of gases when you're talking about harmful effects. And formaldehyde is by far one of the most common because it's everywhere. Excuse me. And VOCs cause a lot of problems. You can see headache, dizziness. Those are typical. But VOCs have even been associated with cancer, kidney damage, those kind of things. Not here to scare you because that's way off in a realm by itself, but VOCs are definitely tied to a lot of health problems. So where do we find all this stuff? I mean, if you look around, VOCs are in the carpet you're standing on, they're at your desk, any kind of pressed wood, they're in ceiling tiles, they're in drywall. So anything that has glue, anything that can off-gas is potentially a harmful VOC. So all these VOCs, all this particulate, microbials, causes a lot of problems. Could be coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, even dizziness we talked about. But if you ask me, this sounds like a cold commercial. So it's not just allergies where I'll say people are feeling miserable. We're actually talking about this affecting people in a health way, causing real issues, not just an annoyance. So what that means, or what I'm trying to convey, is that indoor air quality is important. I'm not going to go through this, but you start looking at things like asthma, sinus infections, sore throats. All these issues can affect people's daily lives. So it is a real issue. And who suffers from all this? If I was to ask you, is there anybody listening out there who doesn't know somebody that has allergies or asthma? Almost nobody can say that they don't know somebody. So it affects a lot of people. And one of the growing groups is children. You look at nearly 1 in 9 children have asthma. Even more have allergies. So it's affecting people at a great rate, and it's affecting children a lot more. So in a heating business, there's a lot of opportunity to address indoor air quality. It's not just the old allergies and asthma, but we're looking at, people with kids, people with pets, people in general is really the target group. Why do I say that? It's because people don't want to get sick. And it's not just the cost of staying home, but the cost of medicine, the cost of insurance, the cost of getting other people in the house sick, to where this thing's not just hanging on for a week. You're losing a month with people being sick, passing around from one person to the next. So I think I beat a dead horse enough, but bottom line is there's bad stuff in the air, there's bad stuff in the home, and ultimately, if we don't have a good filter, we are the filter. We're breathing this stuff in. So let's talk about filters for a minute. There's a million different kinds out there. There's media air cleaners, there's electronic air cleaners, then there's a lot of these little different words that we're going to talk about, like HEPA, electrostatic, MERV. So let's start with an easy one. The media.
You? I just ended.
Bill and I were doing a different boiler class.
What was that?
We had the HTTP channel up at Altos this morning.
Oh, that trailer. It's nice. Got one of everything basically.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to mute that. Media air cleaners. First thing, they're inexpensive. They're easy to replace. They do a great job at protecting the furnace.
Scott Vanderbilt found a new dealer.
That's one of those things that we never really think about. But homeowners just spent, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, getting a new system in place, and we use a 1-inch filter to protect it. Media air cleaners also do a good job at getting rid of the big stuff like pollen. So what are some of the issues with media air cleaners? One of the biggest problems is that homeowners can change it themselves. There's a lot of competition. They can go anywhere.
I wish guy was to figure out how do you find out about this class, so we can do more. Yeah, exactly. Whoever hunted you down. Whatever.
All right, so let's look at electronic air cleaners. Been around for a long time. They are better at catching smaller particulate. Generally thinner than some of the other options. Problems with electronic air cleaners is that they have to be maintained. You have to clean those cells. So that means they're hard to keep efficient. And this technology has been around for a long time. So the story has always been that electronic air cleaners start very efficient, but as they're not maintained or sit in the basement, they lose efficiency. And then they have to be cleaned, and that efficiency will go back up. The story with media air cleaners, that they start less efficient, but they get more efficient as they capture more particulate. Problem is, then you create too much static, and they have to be changed, and then you start over. So the idea has been that at some point, those paths will cross. There will be a point when the air cleaner is not as efficient as a media. There will be a point where the media air cleaner is not as efficient as an electronic. So either way you look at it, those paths will cross at some point. That brings me into new technology. Now, there's a lot of different air cleaners on the market that have new technology, but basically the idea is to get the best of both worlds. So we're getting the efficiency of an electronic, and in some cases higher efficiencies than electronic, but we're getting the ease in the maintenance of a media air cleaner. So instead of having to clean cells, we're actually replacing a media. And the idea here is that we're actually charging particles. That's where you get the EAC aspect. But then instead of collecting on plates that have to be cleaned, we collect on a media, which in turn gets more efficient as time goes on. And then some of the better, I'll call it air purifiers, will actually electrocute the particulate and microbials that are stuck on that media and kill them. So that's where you get some of the zapping. As we look at some of the terms, HEPA stands for High Efficiency Particulate Arrestor or Air Filter, depending on who you talk to. To be considered a HEPA filter, you have to be 99.97% efficient at 0.3 microns. Now that's a very efficient filter. It's almost absolute. And that's why 9 times out of 10 HEPA filters are usually a bypass, because you just cannot get enough airflow through them to satisfy a complete system. Now there is one caveat. There are HEPA type filters. And HEPA type filters will utilize, I'll say, all 4 principles of filtration, which we will talk about. And if you utilize all the principles of filtration, but you do not reach the 99.97% effectiveness, you can be considered a HEPA type. So just be aware of the wording, because there are some filters out there claiming HEPA type that are not actually HEPA effective. Electrostatic. Don't want to beat up on anybody. I know a lot of guys can make good money with electrostatic filters. These are 1-inch filters. They're usually 24 volts. They slide right into the return air grill. They are definitely better than a 1-inch filter, but I would ask you to take a look at the claims, because some of the claims are, as I say here, iffy. MERV rating. MERV stands for Minimum Efficiency Rating Value. On the residential side, there's a 1 through 16 numbering scale. That means 1 is the least efficient, 16 is the most efficient. Problems with the MERV rating is that you can't test an electronic air cleaner. You can't test it because they use a carbon-based dust to test the filter. And if you have an electronic air cleaner, carbon doesn't mix real well, so they can't use it. The other thing they don't look at is static. Now, why is that an issue? Because I'll say a piece of cardboard, you know, it might be a MERV 16, but the reality is you can't use it in a system because your static's going to be off the charts. It's hard to talk about the MERV test without talking about where the industry was at beforehand. ASHRAE used to have two sets of testing. The first one was an efficiency test. The second one was an arrestance test. And basically, for the arrestance test, what they would do, they would take a jar of, I'll call it black gunky stuff. It's called carbon dust. Looks like used coffee grinds. And they would dump this into some ductwork with a blower. They would run it through a filter. And if that filter caught 80% of that black gunky stuff, you had an 80% efficient filter. Now you take that same test with the efficiency test. They used atmospheric air. That's what we're breathing now. So it's mainly stuff you can't see. You take that same air, run it through that same filter, and maybe it catches 20% of the stuff you can't see in the air. The problem was when a homeowner goes to, let's say, Home Depot, they're looking at an 80% effective filter on the arrestance test or a 20% efficient filter on the efficiency test. The homeowner always wanted the 80%, even though it was catching black gunky stuff. That's the difference. And that's why they went back to, or I should say forward to, a numbering scale to where all the filters were on the same scale regardless. They all got a number instead of a rating. There are other tests in the industry. This one is the CADR, and it stands for Clean Air Delivery Rate. Now, I bring this up because this test is done by AHAM, which is the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. And I'll actually talk a little bit more about them later when we're talking about portable dehumidifiers. But these guys deal with a lot of the portable type appliances, and they do the ratings. So the problem here is when they make claims like the world's most effective whole house air filtration system. Why? Because it's 8 times more effective than a room HEPA filter. So any whole house air cleaner should be more effective than a room anything. That's all I wanted to point out. So let's talk about some of the principles of filtration. Probably the easiest one to explain is straining. Now this is where you have a big particulate and it's going to go through a filter that is physically smaller than the particulate. This is good for like pollen, we can call it. And if you've ever made spaghetti noodles, you throw spaghettis in the strainer, the water falls out, the noodles stay in, the same idea. So to illustrate that, particulates going through the ductwork, gets caught on the filter because it's physically too large to pass through. Impaction. Now this is the one I call the head-on collision. The particulate is just moving too fast to get around the filter. So it's what I call the head-on collision. Interception. Now we all know what this is as we're getting ready for football season, but we're starting to deal with smaller particulate that would maybe be able to get through a filter, but as it goes, it's going to get picked off right as it makes the turn, or right as it almost gets through the filter. The last one is diffusion, and this is probably the hardest one to explain because we're dealing with extremely small particles, and as this particulate gets sometimes through the filter, because of a backdraft, because of turbulence, it'll actually come back and get caught on the filter. Now, those are the 4 basic types of filtration. And like I said before, if you utilize all 4 of those, you can be considered a HEPA type. So the newest one that was added is electrostatic. Now, this is this works for any size particulate, but as you can see here, particulate that's small enough to actually get through the filter, because it's charged and the media is charged, it will attract and makes a filter more efficient than it would have been. When I talk about micron sizes, they're extremely small. They're hard to see. But if you look at the back of a postage stamp, over 25,000 microns can fit on the back of that thing. So think about that next time you're licking a stamp. It's crazy. Smoke gets extremely small. In the tip of a human hair, it has 40 microns or more. few other concepts before we're done with filters. Depth loading. Now, if you've ever taken out a 1-inch filter and the side of the return is dirty and the side of the furnace is clean, that's face loading. We catch everything on the front side, and anything that makes its way to the back gets pulled through the return, through the blower, into the coil, wherever it may go. Depth loading is when you start at the back, meaning the side by the furnace, and then work your way forward. So what happens there is you utilize more of the filter, and it's actually able to catch more and hold more. TFP. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is turbulent flow precipitator. And basically what we're saying there is if you can slow down and change the direction of airflow, you can make filters more efficient by making the air go where you want it to go. Zapping is an old technology. If you ever been around old air cleaners, you kind of pound on the ductwork. You get a little bit of arcing. Some people like that zapping sound. Some people don't like the zapping sound. Generally created a little bit of ozone, so people thought the unit was working. You don't get that as much these days. And then settling. Last topic I want to talk about. This is the idea that when you look at bigger microns, if you go to the right of the screen where it says 50 microns, those guys are hitting the ground in less than 12 seconds. So that's a big micron size, or a big particulate. It's hitting the ground. 30 micron sizes, about 30 seconds, it's hitting the ground. So really what we're looking at is 1 micron or less, and those guys are suspended in the air indefinitely. All right, so this is my State of the Union address. We can harp on filters all we want, but the reality is less than 1 out of 10 furnaces gets a whole house air cleaner. The majority of them still get a 1-inch filter. I got to say, I know here we're working with less jobs. The replacement business of filters is still pretty good. Long story short, people know they want clean air. We know this because people still sell millions of portables every year. Portable numbers continue to grow. HVAC typically has been flat. What people don't know is where to go to get it. They don't know to go to the HVAC contractor for a better filter, for cleaner air. So what do they end up doing? You know, they pick up a filter when they're at Menards. They grab a humidifier when little Johnny's sick at Walgreens. You know, they pick up stuff that they can see. Sometimes they go online. And what I want you to notice is that these air cleaners are not cheap. You know, almost $600 for a room. How many rooms do they have? How many rooms do they want clean? So the idea that portables are cheaper is not always the case, especially when you need 2 or 3 of them. I could talk all day about Ionic Breeze. Not going to, but they made a lot of money for a product that didn't do a whole lot. It looks like they're trying to come back out and reestablish the brand again. I put this slide in here because we're not the only group who's looking at people with allergies. There's millions of medication. There's millions of odor sanitizing sprays, and all of it is designed around targeting people with allergies and asthma. It's a huge industry. All right, so as we jump into humidity, basically what we're going to talk about is some of the different terms, reasons people want them, some of the different types. Humidity. Humidity is the water vapor in the air. Absolute humidity is what that water vapor weighs. That's usually more used in commercial. RH is relative humidity. This is what I call the moving target. This is what the air can hold. And it's all based on temperature. So as the temperature changes, you can either hold more or hold less water in the air. Dew point. This is what I call the cold beer can. So you're outside a hot day having a cold beer, and water condenses on that cold beer. That water has reached the dew point. Dry bulb. We deal with this every day. It's the number on the thermostat, it's the number on a thermometer. So it's the temperature. And then Dalton's law. This is the idea that humidity will always seek its own level. So what that means, if you introduce humidity at one side of the home, it's going to eventually try to get to the other side. And when I say try, if there's 5 fireplaces or a big hole in the wall, it may never get to that other side of the house or the other side of the building. So I used to say it would always get to the other side, but that's not always the case. All right, so why do people buy humidifiers? The number one and most common reason is comfort. And the easiest way for me to explain that is when you step out of the shower and you're in the washroom, the air feels very comfortable. You open up the door to the hallway, and all of a sudden you feel very cold. That's because the dry air is robbing the moisture off your body. So we can make the whole home feel more comfortable. Next reason is preservation. So if somebody has hardwood floors, expensive cabinets, crown molding, artwork, musical instruments, a lot of reasons that people want to preserve those things. And the idea is as things expand and contract with the amount of moisture, they tend to crack. So we can eliminate that by keeping a steady state of humidity. Energy savings. Because you feel more comfortable, you should be able to lower the thermostat 1 to 2 degrees and feel as comfortable as you did before. The other aspect is, as wood is not expanding and contracting, you'll get less infiltration from that cold outside air. So you won't have to heat it up.
See you guys later.
I'll probably give you a call, and I'll just shoot the microphone on the blog and all that stuff. So
yeah.
What's we'll give you
If anybody's out there, can you put your phone on mute, please? We're getting a lot of interference. Well-being. Now, we're not doctors, so I don't want to make any claims like that. But the reality is, in the colder, drier months, there's a lot more cases of respiratory illness versus the warm, humid months. So the idea is that, I hate to say it, but all that mucus and stuff in your nose and throat, when it's wet, it catches more stuff and you don't get as many colds. When it's dry and there is no last line of defense, you tend to get sick more often. Some other types of humidifiers that are out there, there's the drum types. Now this is basically a sponge that spins in water. I have to kind of warn against these. There's been a lot of cases of Legionnaire's disease. You got a dark, moist area that's constantly wet. Bad news. Atomizing. Now these are the humidifiers that had this little nozzle. They're nice because you didn't need a lot of space. Problem is, once the nozzle gets gummed off, it gets some lime on there, they spray all over the place. And water and circuit boards don't mix too well. Not going to spend time on commercial. One of the new humidifiers out there is the drainless humidifier. Now this is really for where people don't have a drain, can't usually use a humidifier, or they are worried about the water use. So because there's no drain, they use 100% of the water. And again, if anybody's out there, can you please put your phone on mute? What I want you to notice about this humidifier is if you look at number 10 and 11, I call them little Dixie cups. And what happens is water flows through the panel like a normal humidifier. Water goes directly into those Dixie cups, and they have a little magnet switch. So as soon as there's any amount of water, it shuts off the solenoid. And then this panel is a wicking water panel. So it's not the typical aluminum style. It's a wicking water panel, more like a sponge. So it soaks back up the water, the furnace pulls out the humidity, and if there's another call for humidity, it does the process over again. So it's a nice option just to know that it's out there for spots that don't have a drain or somebody's really concerned about water use. How to pick a humidifier? Most people try to go by square foot or maybe even cubic feet, but the real issue is the air changes. An older house may need a bigger humidifier just because they're bringing in more outside air because of the construction of a house. So a newer house, same size, may need a smaller humidifier, or you can get away with a smaller humidifier because it's much tighter. You're not losing all that humidity to the outside air. A lot of different controls for humidity. I'm a fan of set it and forget it, where you don't have to worry about it. So make that choice for yourself. They should be efficient, and they should be easy to go in and easy to maintain. All right, so we talked about adding humidity. What happens if you have too much humidity? This is ASHRAE's comfort window. And this basically shows at a point where you have too much humidity, and at some point you have not enough humidity. And there's a little sweet spot in the middle where they say between 30 and 60% is the right range. They're actually doing away with this, from what I hear, but I think they should just tighten it up. I think between 40 and 50 is probably a good number depending on the application. All right, so this is my friend the dust mite. These guys eat dead skin. They live off of dead skin. These guys love to hang out in mattresses and pillowcases, that kind of thing. If you think about it, we spend an awful lot of time, about a third of our life, sleeping with these guys. I bring them up when we talk about humidity because if you go back to the comfort window, you see this mites, it's about the fourth one down. If you get less than 50% relative humidity, these guys have an extremely difficult time living. Why is that? Because they actually absorb moisture through their body. They don't ever drink water. They absorb moisture from the air. Now, my only caveat to that is if your house is at 45% or 40% relative humidity, does that mean you'll have no dust mites? The answer is no. I found cases where after a shower, somebody leaves a wet towel on the bed. That's doesn't matter what's in the air. If that mattress is wet, if those blankets are just a little bit damp, it's bad news for dust mites. Can't get rid of them. I've had other cases where somebody goes to bed and they go to bed with wet hair. There's really nothing I can do about that to get rid of the dust mites if you're going to bed with wet hair. So long story short, dust mites cannot live if the relative humidity is less than 50%. The reality is if there's still moisture where they're living, they can survive. So I had to eat my words on that one. But just so you know. Other reasons people want a dehumidifier: get rid of condensation on the windows and make sure that wood floors don't buckle, those kind of things. A lot of people use them for, I'll say, wet, damp basements that they want to dry. Here's my nasty picture. This is, obviously flood damaged. Dehumidifier is not going to help here that much. Different types of dehumidifiers. The most common one is a portable. I'd say after that it gets into whole house and then commercial. See these a lot in basements or pools, that kind of thing. Really the big story on going from portable to whole house is that whole house dehumidifiers use a TXV. Portable units use a cap tube. What that means is basically that a cap tube style portable dehumidifier is rated at 80 degrees in 60% relative humidity. I'm going to say that again. If you remember, I don't think it's the next slide. 80 degrees in 60% relative humidity. They're rated by that AHAM. Go back to the air cleaners. And AHAM says you can get 60 pints a day at 80 degrees and 60% relative humidity. So I ask you, what kind of basement in the Midwest is 80 degrees and 60% relative humidity? The answer is none. So what happens is these portable dehumidifiers run all day, and they have an extremely difficult time getting to the dew point. And so they'll pull some water out of the air, but it's not going to be what it should. You're surely not getting 60 pints a day. And that's why we go to a whole house solution, because you're using that TXV. It allows the unit to operate at lower temperatures and actually pull moisture from the air. Basically, the energy savings, one unit using a TXV, much more efficient than 3 units using cap tubes. And you'll get about the same benefits. Some people try to go, well, what's more efficient, a dehumidifier or an air conditioner? Say really they're looking at 2 different things. Dehumidifier is designed to look at latent. A air conditioner works off of temperature. And a lot of times we're using these in basements where the air conditioner doesn't have runs, or you're not going to run the air conditioner to take moisture out of the basement and run the house down that cold. Ventilation. So this is what I call the Barbie house wrapped in styrofoam. A lot of people call it Tyvek tape, whatnot. But the reality is we're doing this with a lot of new construction, when there was new construction. And what happens is we trap a lot of harmful contaminants inside the house. A lot of VOCs, a lot of particulate, and even some microbials. So one of the ways to get rid of that stuff is to put in an HRV or an ERV. The difference between the two is an HRV gets rid of the latent heat, which means it needs a drain. So we're draining the excess moisture. These are generally used in colder climates. ERVs stands for energy recovery, which means we're transferring the moisture. So you generally don't need a drain. And these are definitely more efficient in warmer climates. If you're having a debate internally about HRV or ERV, the way I look at it, right or wrong, HRVs are for cold climates where it's cold more time of the year. ERVs are for where it's warmer more of the year. Commercially, we generally go to ERVs. And then I'll say, if you have an IAQ problem you're trying to address, whether it's residential or commercial, I generally go HRV. And why do I say that? Because we know that ERVs transfer moisture. And if they're able to transfer moisture, they can also transfer smells. We know that when we've used them for bath fans. Can't do it. But you can do it with an HRV. So if an ERV can transfer moisture, it can transfer smells. My question is, can it transfer chemicals and VOCs? And from my experience, the answer is yes. Hard to find that in writing. So just based on experience, I go with HRV for indoor air quality issues. Here's a real quick picture of how they work. They bring in outside air, goes through a core, drops it into the space. We pull from the space, it goes through the core and outside. In the core, the two streams never actually mix. They just transfer either heat or energy. Yeah, well, real quick, when ERVs get cold and they're moist, sometimes what happens is they freeze. So it's bad news when they freeze. It does bad things to the core. And sometimes if you have insulation, moist insulation that's dark can sometimes lead to mold. All right, induct air purifiers. We use these when we're trying to get rid of VOCs, gases, microbials, and sometimes even odors. So sick building syndrome. We see this a lot, I'll say more in commercial buildings, but there are times when we do run across this in houses. Not nearly as common because people don't always associate their house as being a sick building. But real quick, what a sick building means is that if I was to go to an office building and the people were not feeling well, and I'm not talking about the Monday morning not feeling well from a long weekend. In general, they go to work, they don't feel good. They go outside, they feel better. They go home, they feel better. So there's something in the building that's causing them to not feel well. A lot of times it's dizziness, headaches, could be eye irritation, all those kind of problems. So if I go to that building and I find that the copy machine is right next door to this group of people who are not feeling well, and I find that that copy machine is creating ozone, it's creating a lot of VOCs. Some people would tend to label that a sick building problem. And I say it's not. It's really, we found, we have to move the copier. We have to bring in fresh air. We found the problem and we have to address it. A sick building is, I go into a building, same people are getting sick, but I can't figure out why. The copy machine is fine, they're bringing in fresh air, they're doing all this stuff, but people still aren't feeling well. That's a sick building because we cannot find the problem. So that's just kind of the two differences there. Dirty sock syndrome. Not sure if you've heard of this one, but this is where there's kind of a smell in the space. It's usually associated with like a locker room type smell or dirty socks. That's why it gets its name, right? 9 times out of 10, people are, or I'll say, people are going to blame the coil for the issue, and they're right. But they usually blame mold on the coil. And I can tell you, most of the time, that's not correct. I'll say 9 out of 10 times, it's not a moldy coil. It's usually bacteria on the coil, and it's eating, I hate to say dead stuff that's kind of decomposing there, but bacteria is eating stuff on the coil, it's creating an odor, and that odor is getting into the space. All right, so older technology, UV lights. UV lights do a great job at cleaning an object. If you look at that 4th bullet point, it says object specific. So something that's not moving, it does a great job at killing stuff. Why? Because it takes a lot of time. If you go down to the bottom, the last bullet point there, energy times time, it's hard to say, equals your kill dosage. So that's your CT value. What UV light does not do, it does not travel well. So it does a good job at cleaning a coil, but it doesn't do a good job at cleaning something 5 feet from the coil. And it surely does not do a good job at cleaning air that is blowing by a coil. To illustrate the point, If you have a UV bulb and you go, we'll say just 3 inches away, you have lost 90% of the effectiveness of that UV light. Does that mean it's not working? No. It just means that you need a long time, so something that's not moving. So it does not do a very good job at air flying past there. This is what a coil would look like if every square inch of the coil was maximized with UV lights. In my days, I've never seen a coil that had more than 2 UV lights residentially. All right, so a step up from UV lights would be an induct air purifier. This one is the RGF Phi cell, or Guardian Air. There's many other different types of induct air purifiers, and some of them use the, I'll say, similar technologies to accomplish the same goals. So what does this guy do? This guy creates hydroperoxides. So UV light shines on that white cage and it creates hydroperoxides. That process is called photohydroionization. I would recommend you never say that across the kitchen table. People's eyes glaze over. They go to sleep. So we call that process Phi cell for short. So these hydroperoxides go out into the space and they clean the air and they also clean the surface. Now the surface is the most important word in that slide because we're not just cleaning the air, we are cleaning the surface. And one of the newest phenomenons in indoor air quality is this HTO, highly touched objects. So what they're doing here is they're looking at doorknobs, elevator buttons, railings, and how long can a bacteria or virus live on some of these highly touched objects. And if you look at it, I mean, E. coli can last up to 16 months. Some of these flus, 12 days. Strep, 20 days. SARS, 96 hours. Rotavirus. Man, if you ever had a kid with rotavirus, my God. Bad news, but these things last a long time on certain surfaces. So that's why I go back to surface is an important word in indoor or induct air purifiers. One other issue is the sneeze. Now, I know we're always, I don't say worried, but cringe when the person next to you sneezes because we're worried about those large droplets within that 1 to, I'll say, 5 feet range. But the reality is we need to be worried about the small droplets that we cannot see, the ones that remain in the air. And we're always worried about, I'll say, the same room. The reality is it can go through a building, through the ductwork, and into different rooms because they are smaller droplets or particulate, depending on the wording, and they can travel. The problem with these small droplets is that those are the ones that can go deep into the lungs, and that is what eventually gets somebody sick. RGF created the sneeze test, and what they did, they put this guy in a room, or a girl, we're not really sure yet, into a clear room. They sneeze, and when the RGF hydroperoxides are introduced, that unit knocks out 78% of all that wet nastiness within 3 feet. So in the air, it automatically kills a lot of that wet nastiness. Every year, there's always a new superbug. This year, it's been that C. diff. That one's been particularly harmful to elderly people. There's been some news stories on it. Last year or two, it was H1N1. Before that, it was SARS. So there's always a new superbug that's evolving that we've got to be worried about. H1N1, as you can see, the RGF unit knocks out H1N1 within 2 hours. And this stuff is third-party tested. It's not just RGF saying it. SARS, I don't know if you remember this one. This is where a lot of people were wearing the masks in airports and whatnot. The Chinese government actually accredited RGF with keeping the kill rate down. They put these units in all their transportation hubs, subways, and government buildings. Norwalk. This guy's particularly nasty. This is a surface-borne virus. So this is the one where 1,000 people go out on a cruise ship, 800 come back sick. It's extremely contagious. And because it's surface-borne, you know, if I'll say a cruise ship gets an outbreak of Norwalk, how do they try to get rid of it? I can tell you, they grab a rag, they grab some bleach, and they go clean everything. Problem is, all it does is stir it up, and it goes and grows somewhere else. So this is why Carnival Cruise, Disney Cruise, and there's another one. They all have RGF technology on their cruise ships because nobody wants to be the cruise ship that, you know, people come back sick from. And they actually have to report those outbreaks, how many they have a year. Sorry. MRSA. This is that staph infection. So this is the one where you go to the hospital to get your knee, you know, worked on. Maybe you need some surgery, and you die because you got a staph infection. The weird thing here is it's got that resistant word. How do you usually get rid of an infection? You take a lot of antibiotics, right? Well, this guy doesn't mind if you give it antibiotics, and that's why it's such an issue. So staph infection that doesn't mind antibiotics. Bad news. Very prevalent in hospitals, locker rooms, anywhere where there's mats, gymnastics, guys wrestling. Love that stuff. And as you can see, the RGF does a good job at knocking out MRSA. All right, so how does it work? I use words like killing it. They're generic words. What we are actually doing is oxidizing or neutralizing the contaminant. Basically, we're ripping out either the electron or the neutron and rendering that cell harmless. I like to use the word hydroperoxide, kind of break it down a little bit. It's very similar to hydrogen peroxide. I'll call it a weak mist. But we've all had a scraped knee. You know, mom puts a little hydrogen peroxide on there. Why does she do that? To kill all of the bad stuff. You know, viruses, bacteria, so that nothing bad grows inside that cut. Kind of same idea for the air and for the surface. This is my grade school drawing of what we're doing. The unit mounts in the plenum above the coil. It creates hydroperoxides. I call them scrubbing bubbles. They go through the ductwork, saturate the space and the surface. All right, so I get to this point, and there's a lot of good stuff with indoor air quality. People need it, people want it. The problem is you can't really see it. So to combat that problem, we use a company called Air Advice. Air Advice is basically a little black box, spits out a report in the house. It looks at VOCs, particulate, carbon monoxide, temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide. So what it does, it basically gives the homeowner a report showing them what's in the house and what needs to be done. Here's a sample report, you know, showing that particulate, you know, off the charts at certain times, that kind of thing. Good spot to sell a filter. So essentially, we use it as a tool, close more proposals, sell more indoor air quality equipment, sell high speed, all that good stuff. and I finished in less than an hour. I can't believe it. So if you have any questions at all, there is my email address, my phone number. Be happy to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining our webinar.